thank you for joining us, and be sure to participate, and we will be having a gift card giveaway. So take it away.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everybody. My name is Brent Ashcroft. I spent 31 years working in Michigan TV, and 6 of those years I've had the opportunity to work exclusively with Andy from the years 2010 through about the first couple of months of 2016. And it was an education. It was entertainment. It was fun. He is one of my best friends and will be till the end of days. And you're all in for a treat here today, because we all get stuck on stories, don't we? We all write ourselves into a box or into a corner. And what do? Do you wallpaper it? What do you do there? This man is going to give you every toy in his toy box as to how to make your stories better when there's nothing there to shoot. Andy, without further ado, the floor is yours.
All right. How's everybody doing today? This is always good to get reconnected with Michigan. It's where my wife's from. So what I'm going to start with, I'm going to kind of show like just a daily turn story here. Your average, you're on a deadline. What do you do? And then I'll show some more kind of complex stories that we've had to do about non-visual subjects. So, and then I'll kind of stop in between. If anybody has any questions, they can ask. And then if not, I'll kind of move on to the next one. So, all right, let me see if I can go here. Here we go. Just a sec.
A neighborhood is more than its rooftops and sidewalks, but rather the people.
The people are paramount.
That use them.
People that love their neighborhood and respect their neighborhood.
And Marlon Brown doesn't just work in Old Brooklyn.
Yes, I'm the owner of Lego Heads Barbecue.
He is Old Brooklyn.
This is my home. You know, it's not necessarily this lot, but this whole neighborhood is my home. So yeah, it has to be done. If somebody doesn't do it, then it'll just stay like this.
Boxes, bags, and bottles.
A mini eviction, and somebody tried to burn it up.
Tarps and trash.
Like tarps and old clothes.
And oodles.
You know, somebody
of noodles.
Attempted a spaghetti dinner off here in the corner.
Hardly a recipe for a good time.
You have this well-maintained Metropolitan Coffee right here on the corner. They stay clean, you know, and then just right next door, it's like you're driving down the street and it's like, oh, that's so nice. Oh, God, what's that?
No one knows when it started or by whom, but it's clear that it was a launching pad for a fireworks display. The property owners, the American Drew Society, say it sickened and surprised them too.
It's more of a morale thing than anything else.
And have vowed,
once it kind of became the hot topic,
to get it cleaned up
on social media already. It's just like, okay, we got to do something about this.
And quickly.
I don't think it brings the neighborhood down per se, because it's a great neighborhood. It'll always be a great neighborhood because it's got the people who make the neighborhood, you know, but these are just things that you don't want to see.
Buildings don't make neighborhoods.
Yeah.
People do.
Myself and some of the guys down at Marathon gas station decided if it wasn't done by Sunday that we were just going to go ahead and clean it up.
And to make them better, it takes people too.
Yes.
The people.
Yeah, the people. Exactly. The people in the neighborhood. This is our neighborhood. So we'll get it done.
In Cleveland, Jordan Vandenberg, News 5.
All right. All right, you guys still hear me okay? All right, so that was, just so you know, that was shot and edited and aired in about 3.5 hours. But the point I kind of want to make about a story like that is the as Brent said, the wallpaper way to do it: show up, lock in on an interview shot that looks probably something like this, step back, do that awful 2-shot right off the reporter's shoulder that makes their head look huge, and then get a couple shots of it. The thing that I'm really pleased with about that story, though, is the fact that what I try to teach young people is note that we got him moving around. We just put a mic on him, walked and showed, and I told the reporter, and this is something Brent and I used to do a lot too, is just keep the conversation going, ask similar questions, because we kept getting gnats. Like, there was actually a more formal interview you might have seen in there once or twice, where I did have it on a tripod, and then at some point, because it's a one interview story, because we had a deadline, at some point, I just told the guy, hey, walk, show me around, kind of thing. And then that was after the interview, and he just got rolling. And then he started and notice on that ground level shot, I had that stuff in the foreground. That was kind of, to anybody out there, MMJ photojournalist, whatever, keep your headphones on, because it's funny how you'll get these moments, quote, after the interview is done. So, and just as a, that story was basically about a 50, maybe a 40 square yard area. That's it. So either way, it's not as complex as some of the other stuff I was going to show you, but it just kind of shows you in a small window, because everybody does it. This is kind of what you're going to get sometimes, and how do you bring it to life? This is just simply a guy walking around, and there was more soundy, there was a bunch of more damage. And then frankly, we shot the interview first, then we got him walking around. Then I got cutaways of what he was talking about, the spaghetti and all that in the ground. And then and then that opening stuff of the people walking by, that was just on the sidewalk. And then at that point, somewhere we learned, like, hey, you're in the 5 o'clock now, not the 6. So everybody's been there. Brent and I have been there. So not sure if there's any questions, but I'll pause for a moment if anybody's got any. Or somebody just wants
I did want to ask, so when you work with your reporter, obviously he's writing to video, how does that work? Do you say like, hey, here's some shots that I'd really like to include in this? Or did they, like, how does that partnership work?
Okay, so yeah, there was some of that. What stuck on the line I liked from him is he said oodles of noodles. He's kind of got some real good whimsy to the way he writes. So I know that the one we did, you might notice there was a parallel park in there with some of his tracks. There was one where I was kind of walking in on him. He says something and he gets caught in a thought and he pauses. I know, like, that was to answer your question, that moment. So when I told Jordan, I go, damn, I'd really like to stay on that. I love his facial expressions. I like that he's caught up in thought. And he literally logged it, and he knew, like, okay, the one pause is about 2 seconds long, and the second one is about 1.5 seconds. And he just had a real quick line. So the point was, we didn't want to break up this, thing you have in a person, and it can be the same with like just a standard interview shot too. So yeah, we talked about that. That was like our one quote victory. We knew we were on a deadline. It was like, man, I really want to stay there. And he did. He did a good job in that one. He's a really good writer, and I love working with him. So, but yeah, that's kind of how it worked. There wasn't really a visual other than I said, well, we could start it off with wide shot, grass blowing in the wind. I mean, that wasn't my favorite shot, but admittedly, we're south. This was during pandemic, actually. So this was when nobody was working at the station. So we'd meet at the story. He had a laptop. I put the material. He goes back to his apartment. I run off to, actually, I think I came to the station because I could work in the garage. And that's kind of how it went. So yeah, that was totally non-newsroom, but either way, we were proud of it. We felt like, what was just some story of trash. And we found this guy, and then we built the story around him. He's a cool dude. Any others?
Andy, when you have 3 hours like that, you get sent out, right? You have 3 hours till deadline. You almost have to say, okay, we have an hour to shoot, an hour to log and write, an hour to edit. I mean, you have to, both of you, like you and I did that a lot. You have to time, okay, this is how this is going to go.
Yeah.
Right. We can't dawdle. Right. I mean, is that pretty much how you have to almost timeline that thing out personally so that you can hit that deadline with that story like that?
Yeah. Even when I have more time, keep in mind, like when we went, it was in the 6, I forget what time of the afternoon it was, somewhere after 2 o'clock or whatever, because I'd been on something else. And then maybe because I've been doing, I'm 30 some now years doing it, but there's always a part of me that's always ready. Like in case something, a producer in the 5 o'clock, something falls through, it can happen, and there's days you can't help them, but for the most part, I really try to. But that day, I believe they asked us, like, oh my gosh, something, can you? And we were like, yeah, it wasn't. So either way, that was kind of how it worked. But even if I would have been in the 6, we were still hustling at the same speed, because as we all know now, And I think it's a great era we're in when we're out in the field on our laptops and we feed stories in. You know how like your stress level depends on the Wi-Fi strength of where you're at. I mean, how many people on here have gone and done what I call the McDonald's shuffle? You know, because you know their Wi-Fi. Like I've gotten to the point like, oh my God, please find me McDonald's. Generally, I've had good success with theirs when you FTP or package it. Like I've had good success with them. You know, Burger King's a little bit sketchier. I have no idea why, you know, but I've done that whole dance, and I've done even that stupid thing in the parking lot where I walk the laptop around and all of a sudden you find that, I don't know why this parking space, but either way. But yeah, I budget the time. Like I have found, Brent, as I've gotten older, because there's certain stories that are so visual, you know, you can just keep shooting because it's fun. You know, there's certain stories that are just that way that you have to discipline yourself. Like, nope, half hour. That's it. Granted, there was only one interview in this story. We were gonna do another, and then again, when we lost an hour plus of time, it's like, okay, that's good enough. You know, we were also, yeah, they might want us live too with a backpack unit, and then that got. I don't think at that point they were worried. They were just happy we could get it in the 5 o'clock. So anyway, but yeah, I definitely partition the time. You know, so. Anyhow, anybody else? Okay, let me see. Let me find the next one here. Oh boy. Yep. All right. Bear with me, Chris, that this thing just did its weirdness on me. Let me go here. All right, do you guys see my laptop or not?
Not yet on my end.
All right, stand by. There we go. Let's play. Okay, here is one. I'll set it up. This had to do with Cleveland's had some pretty serious gun violence in the last couple years. The actual night of this shooting, we didn't get it. I don't believe so. But either way, this was, you know, I warn you guys, this is not super happy, but it's just, this is something I think a lot of us end up kind of doing. So either way, I'll kind of work through like the first half of the story and I'll kind of stop it. It's a little bit longer. So anyway, here we go.
I woke up and I heard gunshots and I'm like, oh my God, that's close. And I waited for a few minutes and I heard several more gunshots.
In the early morning hours of July 30th.
And I seen a body in my neighbor's driveway. And I literally started screaming.
Janet Foster ran outside her home
because Vontae was not in his room.
What she saw is every mother's nightmare.
And I kept begging him to hold on, hold on.
The body in her neighbor's driveway, her youngest son, 22-year-old Delvante King.
That's when I see my other son.
And just steps away,
my other son was on the ground, like facing, you know, like in between the car and a sidewalk, so he's laying on the street.
It was Janet's second youngest son, 26-year-old Dominique King, both shot in front of their mother's home.
I ran over to Devontae and telling him to hold on, and then it's like, I ran over to Dominique, so I'm like in between, trying to see, you know, who to help. Just back and forth, and I'm screaming at that moment for help, and no one came out to help.
In the end, Janet nor doctors were able to save either of her boys. The end result, a double funeral.
I just wanted to die.
I hate to hear the sirens. I probably heard the siren to get him. And I didn't know it was him.
It's been almost 2 years since Michelle Bell lost her son, 33-year-old Andre Brown. He and his best friend were in a vehicle in Collinwood in February of 2019 when both were gunned down. Andre died the next day. Michelle tells me she found a single bullet wound in her son's body. Both of these mothers say their sons' homicides remain unsolved.
I know it's somebody that we know. I know that.
And both women now left to cope with insurmountable grief.
Sometimes I don't get out the bed. I stay in bed for like 3 or 4 days straight.
Jan.
All right. All right, everybody hear me okay still? Okay, so basically there was a VO of that night. One of our overnight guys went and got, like what a lot of us do, the yellow tape and, and a lot of that sort of stuff. And, but what we had were photos. The one thing I did a lot that's kind of come up in recent years, like I know we all get sent JPEGs, of these unfortunate victims of these crimes. And I know we can all put that on the screen and blur, do that double layer thing where you blur the sides and all that, because of course it's a vertical picture. One thing I used to do, and I was kind of doing it the last couple of years when I worked at WZZM, is I used to go over to the Meyer on Alpine. Like when I'd have a story and I'd have a JPEG and I would just, they ended up learning, I got on a first name basis with the folks in the photo lab and they'd crank out a photo for me. If it wasn't busy, they could pop one of those out in about 5-10 minutes for me, just depending on the day. But as you can kind of tell, like I really like a physical picture in a story. The other part is, for those of you who do project work, they're literally $6 on Amazon. They're these little red, blue, like police looking LEDs. That's all that was on there. I took a photo. It was in my garage. It's on a little, if you go to Michael's, there are these little easel things. They're about this high that you can put a photo on. So all I did was kind of took that light and kind of just flashed it. I just turned it on and I kind of panned and zoomed. The kind of the red blue fog, that's just exhaust from a car, that's just sort of backlit. And then there was some yellow tape. Some of the blue and red lights you see though, and this is to anybody starting out in the business, the beauty of now is you can put all sorts of your stuff on a hard drive. Brent knows, who worked with me back at 13. I had this cart in the newsroom where I had all these XD, all my stock video was on these XD tapes, which eat up space. Now you can buy, my gosh, like a 4 terabyte drive like that. So what I've always kind of got in my kit is blue and red lights. So the one you saw in there that were actual police lights, that was a shooting that I ended up out on. I was filming it on a Saturday night that I was at all night. This was this biker bar where I don't know how this didn't end up becoming national news, because 15 people got shot. So we were in that mode of, oh goodness, mass shooting. I run over to this place. Shockingly, nobody, but either way, I got there at about 11 at night, right before the news. I was there till about 4 in the morning. I'm bored. I'm sitting there because, it's just yellow. But I've started doing all these shots of taking the camera, throwing the focus out of focus to get that circular shape in the lights. I have a lot of that stuff in that drive. I just kind of popped up there for you. And that's kind of what I do, is I've always got that sort of stuff ready to go. Just because, and especially on a daily story, when you're doing the day after, you're going to do stories about crimes that happen and you're not going to have video to pull from. There just is, and this is, it's a common thing. And part of that is that, when I was younger, I think a lot of people stress about that sort of stuff, and that's natural when you're learning, like, what am I going to cover this story with? But at the same time, what I try to, get people to understand is embrace that. You can really get out of the box, if you will, because sort of like, how many of you have shot like you go to a school board meeting. The only thing you're shooting there is a bunch of people on the left looking this way and a bunch of people on the right looking at them. That's just all it's going to be. You know what I mean? And it's what it is. And it's not good or bad. It's just, you're going to be, what you have is what's in front of you. So in stories like this, I try to really do it, and the one thing I would say about the beginning of that story that the night I went out to that neighborhood, keep in mind, the one thing I would say is like, I went out at night to do it though, because part of it was I was trying to keep the mood very serious. I felt like if I would have shot that, in front of her house during the day, it lacks a certain gravity visually. So, all it was I forget what night I came home, I had dinner with my wife, and then she was watching some program. It took me about 20 minutes to get to that location. I might have shot for about 40 minutes. The one thing I would say, the reveal there, and this was something Brent and I always talked about in stories, is hiding things that when you show them, they got to have some kind of, the one thing I would tell you is I held the, what do you call it? The mural, the flowers on the flat, on the telephone pole and the teddy bear in the street. Did you notice I kind of held that off for a while though? Like, you didn't know, because the minute I show you that, they'd passed away. So that was something I talked about with the reporter. And that was actually her first story with me. She's an anchor down here, that I had said, okay, talk this, I'll create these photos. But, the murals, which she thought were cool shots, I go, the minute I show those, what happened. So that was a big reveal we really discussed about that. So either way, there was a lot of stock video in there, which is of red and blue lights. The fog shots in there that you kind of show, those sort of accidentally happened because I'm out in my driveway doing this stuff and I've got a car going, and it's like, oh, wouldn't that be interesting looking? And I've done some of those shots when I've been at scenes. When you're at a standoff for a long time, work on your stock video. Find those shots of police lights or something, the shot of of blue red lights reflecting in a tree. I'm always keeping my eye out for stuff like that. Because you never know where it's going to help you later on. I do this stuff on daily stories too, not as complex as what you guys just saw, but that's the sort of stuff that, really drives me. And part of what I do as a chief is what I look for anybody coming out, in the end is, people who think about that sort of stuff. It's changed so much. I started in, my first TV station I was at, that was Florida, was like 93 or something like that. So anyway, I will stop gabbing. Any questions about that one?
I had just a couple to squeeze it. How long did it take you to turn that one? Like from start to finish, how long were you working on that one for?
Do you want the actual edit hours? Like if I totaled them?
Yeah, just if somebody was, thinking like, hey, I want to turn a story like this.
Probably say about 2 shifts, but
Okay.
my job, but here's the thing. I never, as a chief, which it's been a long time since I was just GA and stuff, I rarely have 8 hours uninterrupted though. So in other words, generally every reporter I work with here, same stuff Brent used to do with me. All right, when I get the script, there's always something else I might think up, but generally here I get at least a week's warning before it's aired, or as long as somebody gives me about a few days, but to be honest, that story wasn't intended to be that way. That story had to do with this program that helps mothers of shooting victims. It was meant to be, it started out to kind of be this, I don't want to say a light story, but it was going to be lighter. And then the interview, by the way, the background for the women in there, that's fabric I bought at Joann. It's black felt. It's really cheap. And you get those half off coupons, that my wife gets. I go down there and I buy that stuff all the time because I just didn't want a background that had a lamp on a table or a fake ficus tree. What does that have to do with the subject? So we wanted that very stark looking, no background. We really wanted you to see just them, no environment. And we thought it was effective. So there's always, Brent and I used to do that at 13, and that waiting room, you remember that outside the studio, that sort of walled in? I would do some of that out there. We've got, it's funny, like TV stations now I find versus when I started, because, we don't have as many people. I think we can all appreciate that now. Like there's now empty offices, like our building here. We've got we've got a room upstairs that used to be the storage room, but it's big enough that we can go put this felt up in a wall. But anyway, we kind of like that look, but we felt like for the 2 gals in that story, like those interviews, they were not intended to be that heavy. We were kind of, okay, they participate in this program. And then you just ask, how did you get here? What brought you? And then they both really bared their soul, and we were very moved by it. you know, like, okay, we really want to make this story have an impact. And the one thing I would tell people is, I get this question sometimes, Krista, is like, oh, do you ever use actors to stage? And nope. I never go, did you notice in that there's no people when I did the street scene? Zero. There's not a person walking around. There's not like a fake guy pulling out a piece, nothing. It's just photos. But again, I shot everything dark backgrounds, none of it during the day. So it's just something to think about that we keep in the mood. And then sound I'm always looking for. But another thing, when you're at those scenes, like I was talking about that shooting I went to that one night, there were cars coming and going, you know, and I'm just rolling on sound. And granted, that story ran, but you know, you put it in your stock vids, because how many of us have gone and done stories where it's like, hey, do we have any police working on the street on something? Oh yeah, let me go search. These days, every one of my photographers here and the MMJs, that's one of the things we do when people get hired here, is that's standard part of your gear. When you go out during the day, this hard drive has got all this video on it. So it's something I encourage anybody, no matter what you do, whether you work news, production house, build those libraries. They'll really save you, and it keeps your bosses happy that you're doing visual things. When I worked at a production house, it kept clients happy. So, but yeah, that's the quick answer, Chris. I'd say it's about a 2-day edit, maybe a little more, but it wasn't like I did it in a straight 2 days though. Come in the morning, 8 a.m. I get here before everybody, work till noon, go into a meeting, noon to 1, go talk to photographers, 2 o'clock to 3. I do another hour, maybe around 5 o'clock. So see how it kind of breaks up. So it's just, not as an administrator, I rarely get that kind of time. So.
Hey, Andy, real quick, you've shown us 2 stories now, and it harkens back to when we worked together. I did not see any 2 shots in any of those stories. And I'm guessing there is a method to that madness, because you and I were very particular when we were doing stories together about making sure we do not write ourselves into a situation where we have to wallpaper a 2-shot. Explain to people how they can avoid that.
Okay. So of course, promo people at any news station, they always like those shots. You know what I mean? They like shots, and I'm going to say it's so do consultants. They like seeing the reporter being a journalist and all that and stuff. But the one thing I would say, for what it's worth, I still shoot them. I do get them, because, you know, like on a daily turn, Brent, that may be the difference between making deadline or not. So do I like them? Not necessarily. Do I shoot them? Absolutely. But that's really kind of what I call break in case of emergency. But in the beginning of this story, I did get some with Courtney and that gal. We did a thing where I forget, there was a garden or something that they were outside this building, and I did get them, but we both decided, Courtney and I, the reporter, we felt like the minute I show said person talking to a reporter, I've broken the third screen, if you will. I've taken you out of that scene. Like I've got you on the scene where here's 2 of her sons dying on her driveway and on a sidewalk. The minute, she's talking to a reporter, you've broken sort of this trance. I've got people feeling what they feel, but the minute you sort of jump there, you've broken it. Oh, it's a TV reporter. When you really build to that, that's the one thing I'm really keen on, is stay in that moment, stay in that vibe, because I really want people to feel what these 2 women, and they still feel. In fact, I saw Michelle, the second gal, I talked to her a couple weeks ago. I check in, you know, that's the beauty of these connections on these stories, is you find other stories from these stories. But occasionally I'll text her and just say, hey, how you been? You know, well, today's a good day, you know, but for the record, they still have not found the 2. But I would say the one scene, you know, you got to be careful, like where Michelle's son was shot, that was over in Glenville. That particular block is not a good block. I went with I had somebody come with me that night. The other one, that neighborhood's just fine, you know, so either way. But yeah, the 2 shots, I get them. And generally the promo people will come grab those shots. Like I've seen those shots end up in a spot, or I'll show them maybe in a tease. So I'll get it. I mean, I want the other departments to get some of what they need, but within the story, I just find it can just really break, kind of that whole vibe you're going, because I think at that beginning, anyway, it's a subjective opinion. That's just the way I kind of work. It's not for everybody, and it's not certainly for every news director, but it is how I do it. And I haven't run into any trouble with any news director yet, not on that one. So anyway, questions?
One of the things that you didn't mention that would be worth mentioning are the portrait shots that you get too. I love using those as well, where they're talking to them, have them look at the camera or looking off and getting some of those, because you could always use those like you did there.
Yeah. Good point, John. So it's interesting that when you do that black background, limbo, whatever you want to call it. So when the interview's done, I do that thing. I bet you do too, John, where I kind of go at a 45-degree angle and I kind of shoot a tight shot of her face. And then I do that little, that tilt up shot. And then I'll do a pan out of nothing into there. And then those also make for good shots if you want to freeze them too, though. But if you shoot and, you're paying attention to your thirds lines on the screen, if you leave that negative space, that's a beautiful, like you see that one there now, see that moon's kind of off of her face there in that shot, you're right though. They're great shots. It really, I think if you have, again, the fake ficus and there's some of the other stuff in the background, it kind of takes away. So no, good observation. And Brent knows me, like I overshoot stuff, cause you just don't know what might come in handy, there's times you got to leave, but hey, a couple more shots, a couple more, but good point, John. Good point.
Hi, Andy. I have a question about sound.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for all the coupon suggestions. I will put those aside from now on. But what is your philosophy on inserting sounds? I know that some of the sound was to accentuate what was already going on, but some of it was to support it. So can you talk a little bit about editing sound?
So there's sound layers there. There is like that soft siren, and it's sort of like, what I always find as a sound is interesting in a background, and Brent knows exactly what I'm talking. You ever heard the sound of like a far off train? There is just something eerie about a train in the distance. So a lot of when you're doing stories, I'm kind of back to John remember he was talking about the still photos in there that I was using, and those are physically printed photos too, but part of sound gives it some life, and I'm not trying to aggressively use the sound, it kind of eases in and eases out with your audio channels, and then it just kind of keeps you there, because the visuals can only do so much. And again, Brent knows I am a freak about that stuff. I'm always out looking for an ambulance going by, or something, and it just, it's just a way to kind of bring people to environment. You ever seen think about how many of you have seen Ken Burns' Civil War on PBS, and think about that guy did how many part documentary is that with all those old photos back then? But what do you hear beneath all the photos of these people in wagons and all that? You hear horses and drawn carriages and that sound. I think it just helps kind of connect people there. So, I think that it's just another thing that in this era we're all in, I feel like it's harder to keep people's attention on what you're doing and to keep them interested in what you're at. But the thing about the music is, and the sound, because did you notice there was a little bit of music in there too, and that gets really tricky. I really try not to use it. And we've got a good service that I listen to, and I don't know what you might have, but I always look for sounds. The keyword is what's called a drone, D-R-O-N-E. It's almost like this very simple music note. So you don't want stuff that's really super over the top dramatic. And so I've kind of got the both, but yeah, as a punctuation, I would tell you that on the script when I'm working on it, every once in a while, did you notice underneath, I would assume I'm talking to you, Jerry, did you hear those leaves rustling by at one point? So just something, and the leaves were a little bit symbolic, that was just a shot I just happened to catch that night. I go, oh, isn't this interesting? It's windy out here, but it's just another thing. It wasn't a gnat break. It didn't bring it up full and then pop you with it. Every one of those sounds They ease in and they kind of ease out. Every once in a while, I'll kind of really hit you with one, but we kind of felt like good about the fact we didn't over siren it, because that's the most obvious sound to use. There's a little bit of gunfire you heard at the beginning, but I did not use that at the point of, if you will, the death. Like we talked about that in a meeting. So I will tell you, I feel like the sound is harder on those stories. Like, just so you know, I feel like that section, I had it A-rolled before I even started to cover, like, and Courtney, the reporter, at one point I brought her into my office here and I said, all right, just listen. We weren't even watching. We just turned away. So for you, Jerry, what happens is, like, your ears and your heart should tell you, yeah, okay, I'm feeling it. You should just feel it from listening to them, and that's the trick. The visuals fall into place after that. To me, that's kind of that's not it's work, but the sound, otherwise, a reporter's voice with nothing underneath it, even when you got a good voice like Brent, there's a point like, man, I'm tired of hearing myself talk. It's just dry, so, when you're out on just other stuff, collect that stuff, go, the hard drive I just showed you guys, like, it was $25 on sale or something, and it goes with me everywhere you go. So, this, Jerry, the sirens weren't from that particular, of course, shooting, but I think people are okay with the fact that you're trying to demonstrate or illustrate what that environment was like that night. So, the point was that siren, it kind of one of them ran for 20 seconds total. It was just to kind of keep the tension, is all we were trying to do. We weren't trying to dramatize what was happening, and it's a fine line on that. And Brent and I'd always have him come over. Hey, is this too much here? Is this too little? Go get coworkers to look at what you're doing. That's really a good philosophy, kind of stuff like that. And I will tell you, I don't have all the answers. I'm 51 now, but I still go find people. I love finding younger coworkers of mine and, hey, come in and take a look at this. What do you think? And, like, it'll be really cool. It's stupid. No. What? Like, like the train thing. There is something, I know I'm kind of getting fixated on the far off train sound, but there is just something about that it's just bleak, don't you think? There's just something mournful about a train in the distance. It's like something has left. There's just something symbolic about it going away. And you don't have to, quote, show the train, but, sometimes it's birds. Sometimes it can be just something in the distance, but it's years ago when we had something in the state, there's a few people on here might remember it. There was something called the Michigan Television News Photographers Situation or Association. One guy came in named Lane Mickelson, and he talked about, Jerry, when the moments happen, like you what we call shoot with your ears. Like that, anything that's really, for the most part, happening is going to make a sound. And that's kind of what's drawn me anywhere within a story. And again, going back to that first story I showed you, like, we thought we were done when I was on that ground level shot with that guy, and all of a sudden he just went off. He was talking about kind of his frustration with the trash. I was just on some shot of a cutaway. I'm like, whoop, freeze. And I just kind of locked on and kind of let it go, and it's just one of those things. And I thought that really helped the story. So I hope that explanation makes sense.
Yeah. So
Cool.
follow up to that, Andy. You said you were kind of hestant about using music. Why is that? Because of copyright or
No,
are there reasons?
Yeah, good point. Because that term over the top, like, you don't want to. It's subjective, because there are people I've worked with who will use this very dramatic, and I love movie music, don't get me wrong, but there's stuff like you don't need to accentuate the moment. Notice in that story, like, when she does cry, though, what do you hear beneath her? Nothing. You know what I mean? That moment needed to be legit. Like, I didn't need to enhance it. I want that to be very, very, very real. Because I worked with someone years ago that always wanted me putting music in stories, and we kind of made a compromise, because I, of course, was at the time it was just a phase I was in. I was just kind of opposed to it. Like, man, why are we don't need to enhance this part of a story. Like, okay, we can use it in this part because we have to go abstract, right? A little bit of, obviously what you saw is me just trying to help people kind of visualize this scene. Fine, I can use kind of some music in there, but I didn't find it was overly bombastic. It wasn't like, oh my God, the Pirates of the Caribbean soundtrack. It's wonderful stuff, but my goodness, that would not fit. Da 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 dun dun da da dun dun. That's too bombastic. Something very minimal, and it's almost like, and Brent and I did a lot of that. You just want, Jerry, I just call it like a tone, just something that lets people know this is serious. The more minimal, the better. But good observation. But again, I would tell you, when you watch that, notice by the time we came to her, it was her friend who was sitting next to her. That was okay that was just unplanned. She was just sitting there. I was getting a couple of those shots like I was telling John about. That was actually after the interview, and she just broke down. I was just on her, and this friend leaned in and gave her a hug. And that's kind of how we got that moment. But underneath there, no music. Because to me, make that moment genuine, make that real, take that music away. And it really, you want it what I call dry. So good question.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I had a question about the gun that was in the piece.
Yeah.
Was that the lighting of it, fit perfectly. Was that something that you had in your stock, or did you
do
it afterwards? Or
yeah, sure. Good call, Jason. So on another story I was on one time, like this is that whole point about, I know I'm harping on the whole, hey, have a hard drive with you thing. There's another story I did where one of our associate producers up in the investigative department, she's a really great coworker. She works at CBS in Chicago now. I had said, we were doing a story about guns, and I said, man, she used to work in Lorain County, which is the first county west of Cuyahoga. And she's like, yeah, I got a connection to a clerk and a da-da-da-da. They said, do they have any guns or confiscated? Those are all stolen guns, by the way. Those are all, and she said, yeah, let me make a call. And then next thing I know, she says, yeah, he says, if you show up tomorrow at 8 a.m, he'll let you into the stock room. So what I did was I took we have here, like a portable card table. And again, that I'm not being underwritten by Joanne Fabrics here. I'm not sponsored, but either way, I brought that same black felt, put it on a table, and just here's pro tip number one: you want to backlight those. I don't hit those things with light because metal, like water, it kind of reflects back at you. The light was behind and a little bit off center, so to get that simple look. And guns are, for the most part, they're kind of silver, black, and gray. They're kind of a colorless thing. So all those weapons, actually, the ones you saw there, that's been destroyed. So basically, I went in there, I shot till my shoulder got sore, because I'll be honest, I was kind of having, in a way, I was enjoying it because, and we have used that stock video. Oh my God, I don't know how many times, Jason, and stories I've done here that we use again, because you're going to do stories and content coordinators like that stuff. But the way I shoot it, Jason, the key thing is you can use those for graphics too, because notice I didn't use light from this room in here. To me, this is just my opinion, it's just not as cool, you know what I mean? And it's just a thing, yeah, you could put it on this desk right here, but it kind of looks, I don't know. It looks distracting. So that is what it was one morning before my shift. I just happened to get a call the night before. They said, yeah, we've got about 100 guns we're going to put into this. They melt them. And I ran out there that morning and I just shot till I couldn't anymore. And man, that was probably about 5 years ago I did that. And I threw it into our stock system here. So, I've got connections in law enforcement here. Heck, I had some actually with Brent back in Grand Rapids. I had a bunch there too, that there were people I could call. Same thing with hospitals, by the way. Cleveland, as you guys know, we've got, my God, all kinds of healthcare here. I got connections there. Hey, I need to come in and shoot. You guys got a ventilator machine going or something? You know what I mean? Like that one is not as quick, but how many stories have you done, Jason, about somebody, they were on life support for 20 days and you got that photo, right, of him. And this kind of plays back to what Jerry's talking about. So you have said photo of a person in a hospital. They've been in an accident. They're hooked up to the trach and all that. And you've got this photo. How do you make that part of the story come to life? Well, great. The photo helps, but think about that sound underneath that, that helps people kind of, oh yeah, it puts them a little bit in the room, as we say. So yeah, but that stuff, in fact, that shot's been used so many times, I probably had to go out and get some fresh stuff. So, there's always somebody like in the courts, I have had no trouble getting that any market I've worked in, because again, they're about to be destroyed. So cool. What do we got? 11:45. Any other questions in that one or anything you guys can think of? This is awesome. I love this. It's great to talk to professionals. We want to go on to another one? Pretty good. Okay, let's see. Class of 2020 UH trauma. Okay, let's go. Okay, let's go with this one.
You think about the physical endurance. You think about the personal will that it would require to do this.
Their direction was north.
Wade in the water.
Guided
in the worst possible conditions
by a biblical song.
Water children.
Through swamp, by river, and even ice.
Under the stress and strain of being hunted.
Runaway slaves who risked everything.
Coming from a place where you were told from birth that you weren't human, you weren't fully human.
To escape their bondage and live.
Slavery is
free.
One of the greatest sins of the nation.
Getting there required a network of secret routes and safe houses.
Amidst some of the greatest horrors, people also rise up.
The aid of abolitionists.
And risk everything.
And a railroad with no rails.
Not.
Okay. So, Ohio, if you know your Underground Railroad history, this is the hub of so much. So that was a story we were doing for Black History Month, and we had interviewed some people. Anyhow, so how do I go out? So there's a college here, maybe somebody have heard of. Oberlin was one of the stations along the Underground Railroad. So basically you kind of notice the water I shot. We know they used, rivers were ways to get the dogs off your scent and some stuff. No copyright issue in that story because those images are so old. Yet again, Brent, you know that. You and I did a ton of that there. But either way, those are real parts of the path. So if you go from Lorain, which is west of Cleveland, about 30 some miles and go south, we know all those waterways in there were where they're, and I found some houses along there that were railroad station where the conductors were. So the gal in the story at the beginning, she pops up later in the story. That was kind of a last minute idea because she's, by the way, she's like B.B. King's great granddaughter is who she, or granddaughter. So Val has an incredible voice. And then I had called her up through a source and said, hey, I was getting her to come in to do an interview. She's later in the story talking about legacies and what I want my children to be proud of, and to learn the history of this country. And then the funny thing about when she did that song, so yeah, we did set that up because she was going to do it at her church. And then I felt like, why don't you come into the station? But when she did that, God, if you want to call it that humming at the beginning, she was just warming up. So that was actually right before the interview. She was just sitting there kind of getting her vocal cords out and I just happened to be rolling and she just went into that thing. And I just, man, didn't that just sound really soulful and just really spoke to something? It's just kind of this mantra and it just kind of caught me. And then she just kind of went off into it. She didn't realize at the time. So she was just practicing. She's just warming up and she just went. So again, back to you, Jason, there's that black background again too, which kind of helps you kind of on a story. It keeps it simple. You don't want a ficus back there. You don't want some IKEA fern or whatever, because what does that have to do with the Underground Railroad in the 1800s, So you're kind of catching some of my method here of what I use to just keep the story simple. But either way, did you notice, Jerry, that did you hear the water underneath there? When she was singing, you heard the sound of brush. So all sorts of stuff there. So, all right. Questions about that one? I don't know. I still kind of like that one. I love hearing Val's voice. She really brought that story to life, but that was just something we happened upon. The other thing about it, Jerry, did you notice, like, we didn't stop her singing. We just kind of kept her going. Like, we let her thread underneath. That story ended up being written by me. Frank got busy doing other stuff, and I just kind of, it's a little bit, you notice how short his tracks were at the beginning, just real simple, things. I find sometimes with some of the newer people who come in, but that's part of my job, is they'll write these gigantic tracks and they're wonderful and there's all this poetry in them, but it's like, but if you do that, you're kind of getting in the way of all this wonderful stuff you've really worked hard to collect. Try to give some room for that. So either way, but there were, again, 3 layers of sound in there. There's Frank, but there's the music, there's the water underneath. Believe it or not, on another level, there was just kind of those cattails in the wind made their own sound. So either way, we were proud of that one. So questions?
I did have a question. So listening to this, I'm almost distracted by your reporter's voice, because everything else seems to have like the same kind of tenor, I guess, like the same pitch, I guess you would say. Have you ever gone into a story where you're like, oh, gosh, I just don't even want a reporter voice in this. I just want it to be a Nat Pack.
Yes.
It would be better as a Nat Pack.
As a matter of fact, yesterday we did a story about stolen guns in Cleveland, and we will do those. We'll occasionally do something where, anybody remember on NBC News when Tom Brokaw at the end of his show would do, in their own words tonight, when somebody would, because what they had was so powerful that, breaking in the reporter track, like to Frank's credit, he was trying to really be minimal there at the front of that, Krista. He was trying, and that we shortened the tracks, and we could have gone longer before you heard him. We could have kept going with the song and some of the imagery, and in the end, God, who was, I'm trying to remember who the news director was, and it was in between a pair of them, I think. But either way, we could have gone longer. We felt like, okay, this is fine, kind of thing, because the other problem you run into is like, da 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 da, today we da 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 da, Channel 5's Frank Wiley has that story. Well, if you go with Nat for 25 seconds before you hear the reporter, that's too long before you hear them. So it's a fine balance of what's too much, what's too little. So, but I find the one thing that people who work with me here is I am not afraid to go ask a reporter to go revoice something. And it doesn't mean your voice isn't good, but around here, it's kind of become a joke, is any new reporter comes in that's going to work with me, like, you'll find Andy can be very particular about voice. So when I send him in the booth, give me 5 versions of that. Give me a soft read, give me a hard, give me a medium, one with a break in between here and here, and then do one that you think is cool yourself. And I listen to every one of them, because sometimes they'll just, Courtney on the one story, she's got this great voice, but I love when she kind of dips into this lower voice sometimes. It can really punctuate. But I'm with you. Yeah, it's tough at that front. And I don't think you hear Frank for about probably 12 seconds in, just so you know. So we could have kept, but to your point, we could have kept going. Could we have done that story without? Absolutely. Absolutely could have. It would have been effective, but I had to do one yesterday. We had to do this we had a 6 o'clock on stolen guns that aired yesterday, but for the noon, I cut digital stuff, keep in mind, we're all working for our digital teams too in newsrooms now, but I cut this minute version where there was no report in it, just sound and some music in it. And then the sounds of, I forget what else, but 2 interviews, music, and then some sound of scanner squawk and a little bit of siren that had to do with Cleveland's really got like a pretty serious stolen gun problem these last 5 years. So, but they like that, but there's times that's a good vibe too. I'm not saying it's better or worse. It's just different, but whatever you do, just make it your best.
Hey, Andy, just to circle back, when we work together, a reporter track has to be a certain way for you to be able to do what you do best. And it has to be a synergy between the reporter and you, and that just has to be understood. And, maybe explain that, because so many people seem to do 10, 15-second tracks in their packages, and you don't need to do that, right?
Right. So when someone voices, MMJ's here on that, like somebody I used to work with here would voice really quick, and they would do the lazy brown fox jumped over the fence. Okay, if somebody's voicing, that's a little dramatic sounding, but when people voice that quick and there's no space in between the words, I can't insert Nat sound. I can't kind of get some of that music like Jerry was talking about in there to kind of weave in. You want a little bit of a pause because you want people to kind of show like it's interesting, like you've put some dignity to the story. I always like that word, give it a dignity. People will follow. But when you voice like the lazy brown fox jumped over the fence, you can always tighten those gaps though. Remember, like if there are gaps in a voice where it's too long with a reporter, in this wonderful age of nonlinear we all work in, you can shorten those up, you can get rid of them. But if there's no gap, there is nothing you can do. It's what we call mashing. So a couple years ago, I did a story about with Danita here it was about depression among Black males. This was this really tough story. And then we wanted to start the story abstract with this overcast gray. Oh my gosh, all of us who live here in the Great Lakes, we all know what those skies get like from October to March, overcast and dark clouds and all that. But we started the story with depression, anxiety, and we had kind of this, we wanted to kind of keep it, and her voice was too fast. So either way, and I said, and she was kind of struggling with me because she hadn't worked with me before. And then I finally brought her into my office and said, okay, listen to this music note I'm playing. And I just played one note for her. And she goes, oh my God, I am voicing way too fast and way too hard. And I said, no, what you got works. And she's like, no. I feel you. I get you now. We're great partners now. But she went back and kind of deepened her voice a little bit and really slowed it down, and just to anybody out there as an MNJ, listen to yourself and jump back in the booth and do it again. But I just find like only one person in probably the last 15 years that I work with, their voice was the same every time. The problem is like they read every track the same every time. The next track starts up that sounds like the last. The new track that comes up sounds like the last. See that cadence here? It gets repetitive. It gets monotonous, and that doesn't kind of keep the viewer's attention. Break it up. So, don't be afraid to go back in the booth and, really ask your photographer or ask yourself, gee, could I have done that maybe a little different? If you're questioning it, if you're unsure, that probably tells you maybe I should do it again. As you know, I put you through the booth, I don't know how many times, but you know me, I'm particular like that.
I don't know if I ever got out of the booth.
Guilty. Any other questions? Man, this is great to be connecting with all you guys today. I've been editing here pretty hardcore upstairs and doing a lot of abstract. This is nice to kind of see people again. I feel like I've been isolated in a document room. So what do we got here? We doing okay? I'd love to answer some more
getting
questions.
close to time here.
Yep.
Anybody have anything else they want to ask before we wrap up? I do want to ask everybody if you could please drop your email address into our chat box. We're going to do the gift card drawings after this webinar. So I would love to have your contact information in case you are one of the gift card recipients. So please drop that in there. And then also, if you have any webinar suggestions for future ones, let us know. We are trying to work together. We're going to have 3 more of these throughout the year. So if you have any topic you would love to hear more about from some of our experts in the industry, please drop that information into the chat box. So.
Hey, if any of you still have questions for me, I dropped my email in there. Seriously, feel free to reach out. This is what we're doing here today. This is what really makes me go. This is why I still do what I do. I love these discussions. Seriously, don't be afraid to, or send me a link to a story. I do a lot of that now. It's part of my job, but it's just something I like. So if you just want to bounce ideas, or like Jason, when you're asking those questions, man, reach out. Seriously, I'm on Facebook, message me, whatever it takes. Who knows? Maybe you can help me with something at some point. you know, like I don't have all the ideas, but I'd love to hear from all you guys.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing everything. I mean, each one of those stories was great. All had good stuff in it.
No, thanks for jumping on. It's good to meet you all today.
Yeah, thank you everybody for attending. And hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar. It's going to be, I think, September. So keep an eye out for our newsletters. We'll have a Zoom link in the Natus Michigan newsletter blast, or you can check out the Natus Michigan website. So thank you, Andy. Thank you, Brent. And thank you, everybody.
Have a good day.
Have a good Friday.